This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by Rising Star Games. In episode 53 of Bullet Heaven, we got our first taste of the excellent Eschatos from Japanese developer Qute. As the successor to the WonderSwan's Judgment Silver Sword, Eschatos featured some of the most refined shooting action we've ever played. It's no real surprise then that we were super stoked to get our hands on Qute's next title. Ginga Force is a Yoko vertical shmup that was released to the Xbox 360 all the way back on February 14th, 2013. It was poised to win over our heart, but the stars didn't align for us. Interests shifted, funds wavered, it fell to the wayside, and then it blew up in price. It was very much out of reach. That is, until Qute announced a re-release on the PlayStation 4 in 2020. Finally published in the West by Rising Star Games, the time is finally right to see what we've been missing out on all these years. It's time to take a closer look. Players looking to get a second dose of Eschatos, or a fourth of Judgment Silver Sword as the case may be, might be a little miffed at the changes made to Qute's formula in Ginga Force, but they do a great job of differentiating it from the other games that Qute has made. Unlike, say, Compile and its glut of titles with more or less identical mechanics and features, Qute has instead opted for an entirely new structure in Ginga Force. It works in its own right, and it still leaves Eschatos completely relevant, rather than replacing it. One big change is how the controls have been shifted to better accommodate the game's core functions. Movement is exactly as players would expect, using an 8-way system that does a good job of getting players where they need to be. If players need to boost or reduce their speed, they can press the R1 button to cycle through their speed setting, first down, then up. But outside of movement and its speed, the player has 3 more inputs to deploy their offensive and defensive loadout. The square button fires the player's main weapon, while the cross button fires the player's sub-weapon. These weapon systems are similar in a lot of ways to Eschatos, as the main weapon has much further reach, while the sub-weapon has a more limited range but covers a wider area, typically speaking. However, unlike Eschatos, these weapons have energy gauges that will affect their power levels. As players fire either their main or sub-weapons, a small gauge tied to each will deplete, resulting in a reduction in overall power as it does so. The player will need to collect blue energy pickups from fallen enemies to replenish these gauges. Careful weapon management is going to be critical in making it through any given stage successfully and efficiently, so collecting as many of these energy pickups as possible is key. There's going to be a lot of hot death whizzing around the screen at a given time, so players will often need to deploy some defensive measures. A shield-type countermeasure very similar to Eschatos can be deployed with the R2 trigger, which can deflect players away from heavier attacks, while nullifying many other enemy shots. This shield is indicated with the circular gauge in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and will reduce in power steadily when active, and recover gradually when not in use. Other parts, such as bomber attacks and even time augmentation, can also replace this shield to accommodate different playstyles. So there's a decent amount of stuff to keep track of when making progress through Ginga Force, and that keeps things pretty engaging. But there's a lot more to the gameplay than these admittedly simple mechanics. Players will earn credits throughout their time playing the game, regardless of whether or not the stage in question has been completed. These credits can be collected and spent on new parts for their enforcer. All kinds of new weapons can be unlocked through various conditions, including weapons, sub-weapons, shields, bombers, and more. Special passive parts can also be purchased, and up to 3 can be equipped. These can give the player better energy management, more power, and even extra lives. A lot of these parts will also be more useful in some stages than others, adding a layer of strategy to the mix. In short, there's a crazy amount of customization available to the player in Ginga Force, and unlocking all of these parts, and trying them out, is sure to extend the replay value of Ginga Force to extreme lengths, which will most likely be the case as Ginga Force plays superbly for the most part. Sure, the player has to take a third button into account for their shields, time slipper bombers, if equipped, rather than just jamming on both the long and short range buttons as was the case in Eschatos. The constant weapon power flux just from the simple act of firing them also makes the gameplay feel a little less streamlined than Eschatos as well, though it will keep players on their toes. But it's definitely a lot of fun, and figuring out how to keep the player's weapons optimally powered up from stage to stage is sure to be a big plus for many. But this brings us to the general game flow. Ginga Force plays over the course of 10 main stages in its campaign mode. Rather than progress from stage to stage like a regular shooter though, Ginga Force has players take on the game one stage at a time, shooting for a single stage high score and a letter grade. Not all of these stages are immediately available and will need to be unlocked by clearing earlier ones, though several can sometimes end up being unlocked at once. 3 difficulties are available, though only easy and normal will be immediately available. Once hard mode is unlocked though, this results in a technical total of 30 stages. This may turn some players off though, as this slightly limited stage set may be less challenging to overcome without having to take several other stages before them into account. On the other hand, this fosters a fantastic pick-up and play setup, and it's a setup that allows players to get a quick fix in before moving on to other more pressing matters or engagements. Essentially, it takes what is already a genre that, by and large, respects the player's time and brings it to the extreme. Of course, one doesn't simply sit down to play a Qute game for only a few minutes. They're just that good. But there's more. 2 extra training missions known as Judgment Force Tiger and Judgment Force Dragon, a clear callback to Qute's Judgment Silversword, are also available. Complete with 40 waves apiece to overcome in all 3 difficulty modes. These stages play a lot like miniature versions of Judgment Silversword, which will have fans of MKai's earlier work feel right at home. 3 ship presets are available to take these stages on, which caters to several playstyles and offers a decent challenge at some point in the stage with their clear advantages and disadvantages. We prefer Type C. Similarly, a score attack mode is also available for players to push their scoring to the limits within every available stage across all difficulties, essentially doubling up the overall time playing the game for score chasers. As with the Judgment Force stages, they too have a selection of 3 predetermined ships to choose from with which to take on the selected stage, with leaderboards for each ship, stage, difficulty, and overall totals as well. More on this in a bit. Ginga Force is a pretty tough game on the outset, and new players are going to have a fairly rough time getting through any one stage without a lot of trial and error, even on easy. However, players can earn extends throughout any one stage based on the number of enemies destroyed, much like in Eschatos. But here's the kicker. The more extends the player collects in any stage, the more lives will be available the next time the player takes that stage on. Of course, the number of lives the player starts with can also be adjusted to default numbers or less, if the player wishes. Of course, with higher difficulty comes a much stiffer challenge, and the later stages in specific on normal and above provide the kind of difficulty that very experienced veterans might still have a hard time with. All in all, we can say without question that Ginga Force definitely upholds Qute's legacy post-Eschatos, and while it's not quite as good as Eschatos from a pure gameplay standpoint, it's still one of the best shooting games on the PlayStation 4, and by extension the Xbox 360, to date. So what about its scoring system? As far as scoring goes, Ginga Force may be a little on the limited side, given that each stage is essentially its own self-encapsulated score attack. No 1cc's here, but that doesn't mean that scoring is any less engaging. Being able to engage and defeat as many enemies as possible will bring the player's score up in no time at all. Each enemy has its own point value, and, in typical fashion, this is added to the player's score when they are defeated. But there's often a number of extra objectives in any given stage. Satisfying certain conditions will allow players to gain some huge point bonuses. Bosses also give players a number of scoring opportunities, so simply killing them off as quickly as possible is not recommended when going for a high score, since they have a number of destructible bits that will boost a player's score significantly if they can be picked off. Tearing down a boss part by part is not only pretty satisfying, but rewarding as well. Granted, this often means navigating some truly dense fire, so the player's defensive style definitely comes into its own. That said, the bonuses awarded are often well worth the extra effort. Stage end will also add quite a decent chunk to the player's stage total depending on various criteria and whether any special conditions are met. How long the player takes to clear the stage, how many lives are lost, and mission-specific objectives all add to a sizable bonus. There's also a section at stage end for extra credits to be awarded as well. The collected total is added to a first-time clear and a second general clear total. How well a player performs will also give that player a letter grade between D and S. An all S clear is therefore the ultimate objective in Ginga Force. Though once again not as in-depth as the scoring mechanics in Eschatos and its different modes were, there's still more than enough here to keep players looking to rank in on Ginga Force's online leaderboards engaged in Ginga Force's score attack mode. As mentioned before, scores will be logged by ship type, stage, and difficulty, with single stage and total stage scores available for all stages unlocked and attempted.
操業停止中のセプトニウム採掘場で採掘メカが暴走しています。採掘場に向かい暴走した原因を突き止めてください。
原因だってな。そんなんちょっと言ったところでわかるもんなのか？
これも任務よ。行くだけ行ってみましょう。
Judgment Silversword and Eschatos had pretty great presentations, but neither was especially flashy, at least graphically speaking, versus others on their home consoles. Ginga Force, on the other hand, really nails it with its visuals. Even on the Xbox 360, Ginga Force managed to shine with its graphical prowess. However, the PlayStation 4 is even clearer. There are many out there who view shooters with 3D polygons as visually inferior to those that employ 2D backgrounds and sprites. And sure, we understand this at some level. Hitboxes are a little less defined in the 3D space for sure, but Ginga Force still works really well, even incorporating a half dimension to its enemies' positions for an even greater visual depth. The general playfield is presented in a 4:3 aspect ratio with fancy pillar boxing bordering the screen. This makes Ginga Force a Yoko vertical shmup. Unlike Eschatos in its 3:4 tate presentation, this aspect ratio means there is no tate mode available. The action can even shift behind the player, giving Ginga Force pseudo 3D shooting game segments, though these don't last very long. In these parts, green barriers limit horizontal movement if players fly too far to the left or to the right. When it comes to the general design in Ginga Force, cool ships and bosses are found throughout, and they have a decent amount of personality to them. Great draw distances, shiny water effects, and decent reflections end up giving this game some pretty excellent visual chops, despite a blurry texture here or there. Even the enemy bullets are cool, especially with a number of the bright, sparkly shot types which, in greater numbers, are sure to dazzle players. While there is a touch of slowdown here or there, Ginga Force manages to run at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second the vast majority of the time. Accompanying the silky visuals is an awesome soundtrack. Once again, headed up by Yosuke Yasui, Ginga Force is no longer a solo endeavor. A number of super sweep composers are also here, including Shinji Hosoe. The result is an OST that is filled to the brim with excellent catchy tracks. We'd say it's good enough to track down the OST to listen to outside of the game. On the topic of sound, the effects in general are also top tier, though a great many have been directly repurposed from Eschatos. Others, while similar, have been upgraded, including the ever-satisfying Extend effect, now with a less robotic, more natural voice. Credit and energy collection, shots, explosions, and more work well for what's happening on screen with nothing in the way of irritating effects. The siren effects for some of the security measures in Stage 2 and the Stage 7 boss do come close though, even if they still work in decent ways. The plot in Ginga Force also takes a more central position within its gameplay, with consistent banter throughout every stage between the player characters, their superiors, and the bosses they end up squaring off against. All of the dialogue is in Japanese, with English subtitles displaying beside their portraits on the top right-hand corner of the screen. In the Xbox 360 version, only Japanese is supported, so having a fully localized version of the game that Westerners can finally understand, VO notwithstanding, is a nice plus. If players want even more insight into the cast of characters, as well as the geography, politics, and history of the world in Ginga Force, an extensive wealth of gallery entries can be unlocked through normal play that detail the events pertinent to the plot of the game. In addition, a number of videos can also be unlocked through various conditions. Finally, a number of options exist for control schemes, sound, and visuals. And as always, PlayStation Trophy support is present as well. In short, Ginga Force ticks off all of the boxes that make Qute a developer worth paying instant attention to with each of its releases. But how does Ginga Force stack up? Let's take a look. Ginga Force controls well enough. No input lag to speak of, snappy movement, and lots of options, but it doesn't feel quite as natural or as streamlined as Eschatos. The stage setup in Ginga Force is very different than that of Judgment Silversword and Eschatos. This allows for mastery of every stage without having to worry about a perfect run over the game's 10+ stages. Ginga Force's lack of a traditional stage set doesn't keep it from having a lot of replay value. With a total of 36 stages to play through while striving for a high-letter rank, not to mention its fully featured online score attack mode, there's definitely lots to play here. Visually, this is definitely a step up from Eschatos, and Ginga Force has some really cool backgrounds, fantastic characters, and excellent mechanical design. Super Sweep's Yosuke Yasui returns with an excellent driving soundtrack, with contributing tracks from Shinji Hosoe, Hiroto Saito, and Yasuhito Watanabe. The voice work is great and the sound effects are fantastic. Though the control is a little less streamlined than that of Eschatos, the single-serving stages paired with a vast wealth of upgrades and equipment makes for a game that constantly invites players back for just one more run. Ginga Force is only about $20 US. The Xbox 360 version currently commands a price around 8 to 10 times that at the bare minimum. With the kind of replay value that Ginga Force boasts, the PlayStation 4 version, and by extension the Steam version, is pretty much a no-brainer purchase. Though it's not quite what I expected, getting to finally play Ginga Force was a rush. Qute definitely knows what's up when it comes to making a shooting game, and Ginga Force offers a vastly different, yet familiar feeling structure that really has us looking forward to the forthcoming PS4 and PC releases of Natsuki Chronicles. Despite its excellence, the Xbox 360 version is a very hard sell for its price these days, but without question, the PlayStation 4 and Steam versions are essential shooting games that are thankfully more widely available now than ever before. Ginga Force gets a 4.75 out of 5. You can get Ginga Force on the PlayStation Network Store or Steam for about $20 US. You know what, that was worth the wait, and good enough that I needed to snap up a copy of the Xbox 360 version while I could. No physicals have been announced nor are planned for the PlayStation 4 version after all, and it'll be needed for something I may or may not be planning. And now I can't wait to check out Natsuki Chronicles. Indiegeddon was just about scrapped recently, but we may be bringing it back. So starting with 283, we're going to see about producing a full week of Indie Shmup reviews. We'll see you all in the next episode.